The chamber smells of sweat, wool, and cold marble. Torches throw unsteady light across the faces of Rome's most powerful men as they gather beneath the statues of their ancestors. The stone eyes of the dead staring down in silence. A figure in a white toga steps forward, confident, almost serene, as if this were another day of speeches and petitions. Then the movement begins, sandaled feet, a rustle of fabric, a glint of steel drawn from beneath folds meant for peace. Hand seize, a blade flashes, one strike becomes many. In the crush of bodies, a ruler who has bent the world to his will discovers too late that conquest does not end at the edge of the map. It ends here, in the heart of Rome, where ambition has always had a price, and the question that has haunted the Republic for generations finds its answer in blood. When one man rises high enough to eclipse all others, can a state built on shared power survive? Rome did not begin as an empire. It was a republic, proud, combative, and perpetually on the brink of tearing itself apart. By the 1st century before Christ, the city had become mistress of the Mediterranean, its legions planting Roman standards in Spain, Greece, North Africa, and the rich kingdoms of the East. Victory poured wealth into Italy, but it did not pour evenly. Senators and tax farmers grew fat on provincial profits, while smallholders, once the backbone of Rome's army, watched their farms swallowed by vast estates worked by enslaved captives. The streets filled with displaced citizens, dependent on patrons, hungry for grain, and ready to follow anyone who promised dignity and bread. Politics, in theory, remained a sacred inheritance. Consuls were elected yearly, laws were debated in assemblies, and senators spoke in the name of tradition. In practice, elections were bought, juries were bribed, and mobs could decide policy as surely as any vote. The old order called itself the Optimates, defenders of ancestral custom. Their opponents, the populares, claimed to speak for the people. Yet many sought not reform for its own sake, but power through popularity. Reformers like the Gracchi had been beaten to death in the streets. Generals like Marius and Sulla had turned armies into personal instruments, marching on Rome itself and staining the city with civil war. In this world, honor was currency, reputation was armor, and a single misstep could mean exile, ruin, or a knife in the dark. It was an age that rewarded boldness, and it punished restraint. Into that furnace, a man was born who would learn to master it, and in mastering it, would help destroy it. He came into the world in 100 BCE, in a Rome where noble names still mattered even as noble fortunes dwindled. Gaius Julius Caesar belonged to the ancient patrician gens Julia, a family that traced its lineage to Venus through Aeneas, the mythic survivor of Troy. The claim was grand, but the household was not among the richest of the elite. Caesar's father held respectable offices, yet it was his mother, Aurelia, renowned for discipline and intelligence, who shaped his early life. He grew up amid the city's harsh lessons, the crush of crowds in the forum, the spectacle of triumphs, the venom of political trials, the brutal certainty that status could be upheld only by constant struggle. As a young man, Caesar witnessed the Republic's unraveling at close range. The dictatorship of Sulla, an aristocrat who seized Rome by force, left an imprint on anyone with ambition. Sulla posted lists of condemned men and rewarded those who killed them. Properties were confiscated. Careers were broken. Caesar's own ties placed him in danger. He was connected by marriage to the faction opposed to Sulla, and the dictator ordered him to divorce his wife Cornelia, daughter of a prominent ally of Marius. Caesar refused. For that defiance, he was stripped of priesthood and inheritance and forced into hiding. Friends intervened. Bribes were paid. Sulla relented, yet not without a warning. According to later tradition, he remarked that in Caesar there were many Mariuses, a forecast, whether exact or embellished. That captured the fear of the young noble already inspired. Caesar escaped Rome and sought safety and distinction in military service. In Asia Minor, he learned the hard discipline of command and won honor for courage at the siege of Myt. He studied rhetoric and law, honing the weapon that could cut deeper than any sword: speech. Even in these early years, stories gathered around him like shadows: his captured by pirates, his cool insistence that they raise his ransom because he was worth more, his promise that he would return and crucify them, and his fulfillment of that promise with chilling efficiency. In such tales, whether polished by repetition or not, the outline of a man emerges, audacious, theatrical, and utterly convinced that fate had marked him for greatness. When Rome called him back into the violent theater of politics, he returned not as a naive aristocrat, but as someone hardened by danger and trained in the arts of persuasion and war. The stage was set for his ascent. The climb began in the traditional manner of Roman ambition: offices, favors, alliances, and the careful cultivation of public image. Caesar prosecuted corrupt governors, not merely to cleanse the state, but to show the people that he could strike at the powerful. He spent lavishly on games and public spectacles, sinking into debt that would have crushed a lesser man. Yet those debts were not a weakness. They were an investment in something Rome valued above all. He understood the city's appetite for display: exotic beasts, mock battles, gladiators, the kind of grandeur that made the poor feel seen and the elite feel threatened. Caesar's charisma was not only in public shows. He had an ability to remember names, to grant favors, to make even small men feel they were part of a larger destiny. Behind the warmth lay calculation. Rome's political world ran on patronage, and Caesar built networks as carefully as a general builds supply lines. When he served as quaestor in Spain, he saw not only provincial administration but the possibility of conquest as a ladder to power. Later, as aedile, he decorated the city, restored monuments, and made himself unavoidable. Yet Roman politics was a knife fight, and no man rose alone. Caesar's decisive turning point came through a partnership that reshaped the Republic. The informal alliance, later called the First Triumvirate, he bound himself to Pompey the Great, Rome's celebrated general, and to Marcus Licinius Crassus, the richest man in Rome. Pompey wanted land for his veterans and ratification of his eastern settlements. Crassus wanted influence and relief for his financial allies. Caesar offered what each lacked: political skill, popular appeal, and a bridge between rival ambitions. In return, they gave him protection and opportunity. Elected consul in 59 BCE, Caesar pushed through laws that favored Pompey's soldiers and secured benefits for his allies, often bulldozing senatorial resistance with a mixture of procedural daring and street-level intimidation. His enemies called him a tyrant in the making. His supporters called him a man finally capable of action in a paralyzed state. At the end of his consulship, Caesar obtained something more valuable than any law: a multi-year command in Gaul. It was, on paper, an assignment to govern. In reality, it was a gateway to an army, a frontier, and the chance to earn the kind of military glory that made Rome forgive almost anything. As he rode north toward the forests and rivers beyond Italy, Caesar carried with him not only ambition, but the knowledge that Rome's factions would never stop hunting him. He would need victory not once, but repeatedly until his name became too great to punish. Gaul was not a single nation, but a mosaic of tribes, rivalries, and shifting loyalties stretched across modern France, Belgium, and beyond the Rhine. Caesar entered this world in 58 BCE and quickly found pretexts and opportunities for war. Some campaigns were presented as defensive, protecting Roman allies from migrating peoples or hostile coalitions. Others were unmistakably aggressive, expanding Roman influence by force. The result was a decade of relentless fighting that transformed both Gaul and Caesar himself. He moved with speed and spectacle. He built bridges across the Rhine to show Germanic tribes that no river could shield them. He launched expeditions to Britain, an island at the edge of Roman imagination. Not to conquer it permanently, but to prove he could strike where Rome had never reached. He mastered logistics, engineering, and the morale of men far from home, rewarding loyalty and binding soldiers to his personal fortune. In his own account, the Commentaries on the Gallic War, he crafted a narrative of necessity, courage, and Roman destiny reports that reached the city and turned campaigns into political theater. The most dramatic test came in 52 BCE, when Vercingetorix, a charismatic Arvernian leader, forged a widespread revolt. For a moment, Gaul threatened to slip from Caesar's grasp. The war became brutal: scorched earth, sieges, starvation, and desperate marches through hostile terrain. At Alesia, the climax arrived. Caesar's legions encircled the hilltop stronghold while a relief army gathered outside, trapped between two enemies. Caesar ordered a feat of engineering and endurance: double lines of fortifications, one facing inward to contain the besieged, another facing outward to repel rescuers. It became a battle of walls, trenches, stakes, and nerve. When the Gauls attacked from both sides, the fighting turned ferocious, the outcome uncertain. Caesar committed reserves at critical moments, appearing where the line faltered, his red cloak marking him as both target and symbol. In the end, the relief force broke, the siege held, and Vercingetorix surrendered, an act that later artists would paint as tragic dignity. Beneath Roman triumph, Gaul's conquest poured wealth into Caesar's hands and made his legions the most experienced in the Roman world. It also carried a darker legacy: immense loss of life, displacement, and enslavement on a vast scale. Ancient sources vary on numbers, and modern historians debate the extent, but there is no debate that the war was catastrophic for many communities and immensely profitable for Rome's conquerors. For Caesar, it achieved what he required most: an army devoted to him, a reputation that rivaled Pompey's, and a political position that made his return to Italy both inevitable and dangerous. Rome had once feared ambitious generals. Now it had created another, and this one had learned, in the forests and fortresses of Gaul, that destiny favored those who moved first. As Caesar's star rose, the alliance that had shielded him began to rot. Crassus died in 53 BCE at Carrhae, his army destroyed in a disastrous campaign against Parthia. The balance of power shifted. Pompey, once Caesar's partner, drifted toward the senatorial elite that feared Caesar's return. Personal ties frayed as well. Caesar's daughter, Julia, Pompey's wife, and a link between the two men, died in childbirth. In Rome, politicians spoke of restoring the Republic, yet many meant restoring their own dominance. They demanded Caesar lay down his command before seeking further office, a legal trap that could expose him to prosecution and ruin. Caesar sought compromise. Proposals moved back and forth. Mutual disarmament, simultaneous resignation of commands. Suspicion hardened. For Caesar, to return as a private citizen was to walk into the jaws of his enemies. For the Senate's hardliners, to allow Caesar to keep his power was to accept that law could be bent by force. The state drifted toward collision. In January 49 BCE, the moment arrived at a small river in northern Italy, the Rubicon, a boundary no commander was permitted to cross with an army. Caesar stood at the threshold of rebellion, aware that once he stepped over, there would be no legal return. Ancient writers preserve a phrase, "The die is cast," as the emblem of that decision, though its exact wording is debated. What is not debated is the act itself. Caesar crossed with the 13th Legion, and the Republic's crisis became open war. Rome, unprepared and panicked, fell without a fight. Pompey and many senators fled south and east to gather forces. Caesar pursued not only with armies but with calculated mercy. He offered clemency to defeated opponents, presenting himself not as a butcher but as a restorer of order. Some accepted, others suspected the mercy was a weapon and obligation wrapped around former enemies like chains. The civil war spread across the Mediterranean world. Spain, Greece, North Africa. At Pharsalus in 48 BCE, Caesar faced Pompey's larger army in Thessaly. Against expectations, Caesar's veterans broke Pompey's cavalry and rolled up his lines. Pompey fled to Egypt, seeking refuge among the Ptolemies, only to be murdered upon landing. An assassination meant to curry favor with the victor. Caesar, arriving soon after, reportedly turned away in disgust. Whether driven by genuine grief, political calculation, or both, he understood the value of appearing above vengeance. In Egypt, Caesar became entangled in a dynastic struggle between Ptolemy XIII and Cleopatra VII. The city of Alexandria erupted into conflict. Caesar, with limited forces, fought street by street while alliances shifted. Cleopatra emerged as a partner, political and, according to most ancient accounts, personal. Their relationship became another lightning rod for Roman gossip. Whispers of Eastern luxury, of a queen who might enthrall Rome's greatest general. Yet the Egyptian episode was also strategic. Control of grain supplies and stability in the East mattered deeply. Caesar left Egypt with Cleopatra installed and Roman interests secured. But rumors followed him back across the sea like smoke. The wars did not end with Pompey's death. Caesar hunted remaining resistance in Africa, defeating a coalition of Pompeian loyalists and the Numidian king Juba in Spain. He crushed Pompey's sons in a brutal campaign, culminating at Munda in 45 BCE, one of the hardest battles he fought. By his own admission, each victory tightened his grip. Each victory also narrowed Rome's options. The Republic's institutions remained, but they now revolved around a single man whose power had been proven on battlefields from Gaul to the Nile. With his enemies broken, Caesar returned to Rome not as a consul among equals, but as the axis of the state, praised by many, feared by others, and watched by all. In Rome, Caesar set about the work of governance with the same energy he had brought to war. He understood that conquest without administration was a temporary triumph. The city needed grain, debt relief, jobs, and a functioning government. Provinces needed regulation. Veterans needed land. The calendar itself, long mismanaged for political advantage, needed reform. He expanded the Senate, adding men from Italy and the provinces, diluting the old aristocracy's exclusivity. He reorganized municipal government, sought to curb corruption in provincial administration, and planned colonies to settle veterans and relieve urban crowding. He initiated building programs that reshaped the city's monumental landscape. He implemented the Julian calendar, aligning civic time more closely with the solar year, a reform whose echoes still shape how the world measures days. He offered citizenship more broadly, drawing the provinces closer to Rome and laying groundwork for a more integrated Mediterranean polity. These acts could be framed as statesmanship, and many were. They could also be framed as consolidation. Each reform increased Caesar's reach, replaced rivals with loyalists, and presented him as the indispensable man. Honors accumulated around him. Statues, titles, privileges, once unthinkable for a citizen of a republic. He was named dictator repeatedly, and finally dictator, perpetuo dictator, in perpetuity. Coins began to bear his image, a symbol that moved him nearer to the kings Rome claimed to despise. He sat above other senators at games. He accepted public adulation with a calm that some interpreted as confidence and others as contempt. The most dangerous problem Caesar addressed was not a policy but a principle. The Republic's old balance of power had failed to manage an empire won by armies and governed through patronage. Caesar's solution was personal authorities, centralized, decisive, and backed by veterans who loved him. For those exhausted by decades of chaos, this was salvation. For those raised to believe Rome's liberty depended on no man standing above the law, it was the end of everything. The city's streets could cheer Caesar in the morning and whisper against him at night. In the Senate, smiles hid calculations. In private villas, men who owed him their lives debated whether gratitude was a virtue or a trap. In that charged air, opposition did not gather as a mob, but as a conspiracy, and convinced that murder could be an act of patriotism. The plot formed among senators who called themselves liberators. Some were old enemies whom Caesar had pardoned, men like Marcus Junius Brutus and Gaius Cassius Longinus. Their motives were complex, and ancient sources emphasized different threads: genuine republican idealism, personal resentment, fear of monarchy, and the belief that Caesar's death would restore political equilibrium. There were warnings, omens, in the language of Rome, seemed to thicken in the weeks before the assassination: a soothsayer's caution, unsettling dreams, anxious friends urging caution tales preserved by later writers who knew the ending and dressed the approach with foreboding. Even without omens, the political signs were clear. Caesar spoke of campaigns in the east, perhaps against Parthia, perhaps farther. He planned departures that would remove him from Rome and leave the city in the hands of men who might undo his work. For conspirators, time narrowed. On the Ides of March 44 BCE, Caesar went to a meeting of the Senate held in the theater of Pompey, an irony so sharp it seemed devised by fate. Pompey's own complex, built by the man Caesar had defeated, became the site of Caesar's death. The conspirators gathered close, as senators could, under the guise of petition. A first blow strokeward, not instantly fatal. Then the others followed, a storm of blades. Caesar tried to defend himself, then yielded as the attack became inescapable. Ancient accounts differ on his final words. Some offer the famous line addressed to Brutus, others suggest silence, or a phrase in Greek. What remains certain is the tableau: a body collapsing at the base of Pompey's statue, blood pooling on the floor, the liberators raising their hands and proclaiming liberty as Rome recoiled in shock. The assassins had expected gratitude. They had expected the Republic to breathe again. Instead, the city fell into confusion. Crowds did not rally to the Senate. Soldiers did not embrace the killers. Caesar's allies moved quickly. Mark Antony, Caesar's lieutenant and political heir in the immediate moment, maneuvered to control the narrative. At Caesar's funeral, Antony's speech, whether precisely as later dramatized or not, ignited public fury. The sight of Caesar's wounded body, displayed for the people, turned grief into rage. Mobs hunted conspirators, the liberators fled, and Rome slipped once more toward civil war. Caesar's final years did not end with a quiet settling of the state. They ended by exposing its deepest wound. He had won battle after battle, yet he had not won the trust that outlives fear. His clemency, meant to bind Rome together, left powerful enemies alive and humiliated. His accumulation of honors, whether sought or accepted for political necessity, made him appear kinglike in a culture trained to hate kings. His genius for decisive action, the very trait that saved him in war, left little room for compromise in peace. The Republic had produced him, armed him, and cheered him, and, then unable to contain what it had made, struck him down. But death did not diminish his power. It released it, transforming a man into a symbol that others would wield like a weapon. In the years that followed, Caesar's legacy became the prize in a contest for Rome's future. His adopted heir Octavian, later Augustus, used Caesar's name as a banner, presenting himself as the avenger of a murdered father. Mark Antony sought to inherit Caesar's position through charisma and military strength. The conspirators tried to justify their act as liberation. Each claimed to act for Rome. Each drew, in one way or another, from Caesar's achievements and from the terror his ambition inspired. The result was not restoration but transformation. More civil wars, more prescriptions, and finally the emergence of a new system in which one man held preeminent power beneath republican forms. The empire that followed did not bear Caesar's official title, but it bore his imprint. Even the word Caesar became a synonym for ruler, carried into imperial titles across centuries and languages. Historians have argued over him since antiquity. Some see a reformer forced into dictatorship by a broken system, a man whose policies addressed real suffering and whose administrative vision helped stabilize a vast realm. Others see a ruthless opportunist who used the language of the people to seize power, whose wars in Gaul were as much about personal glory as Roman security, and whose example encouraged the end of republican government. The evidence itself is complicated. Caesar wrote brilliantly about his own campaigns, but he wrote as a politician, shaping perception. His enemies wrote with bitterness, his admirers with devotion. The truth lies in the tension between them. Caesar was capable of generosity and mercilessness, of legal reform and illegal force, of patience in planning and reckless speed in execution. He mattered because he embodied Rome's dilemma, an empire ruled by institutions designed for a city-state, and a political culture that rewarded men who could bend those institutions until they broke. In the end, his story is not merely the rise and fall of a single Roman. It is the story of a republic that conquered the world, and could not govern what it had taken without remaking itself. A young noble, shaped by civil violence, learned that power belonged to those who dared. He mastered speech, debt, spectacle, and war, turning legions and laws into instruments of his will. He crossed a river that could not be crossed, defeated rivals who seemed invincible, and returned to Rome with the authority of a conqueror and the responsibilities of a statesman. He tried to reorder time itself, and he succeeded. Yet the one thing he could not conquer was the fear of those who imagined their liberty dying in his shadow. The marble chamber where he fell did not witness the Republic's rescue. It witnessed its final confession that Rome's struggle was no longer between classes or factions, but between the ideal of shared rule and the reality of power. Caesar's ambition did not create that conflict, but it revealed it with unbearable clarity. He died beneath the statue of a defeated rival, surrounded by men who believed they were saving the state, and by doing so, they ensured that his name would outlive them, or no longer only a man, but a title, a warning, and an inheritance. In Rome's long memory, the blade that ended his life did not end his story. It began the empire.